China in the 13th century. In 1218, the great Ming general Cheng Ho complained that all the celestial sea, the rather poetic name the Chinese gave to the ocean, was infested with pirates. From the Philippines to Japan, sea robbers threatened. The great admiral's attitude was stern. He pointed out that when the pirates challenged his authority, he killed 5,000 of them. The admiral put their leader into prison for life. The swamps and islands of the Far East had long been home to people who lived off the sea, fishing in season and out of season, indulging in a little sea robbery. For much of the Middle Ages, the Chinese Empire had grand ambitions. Fleets were sent to India, to Africa, to Arabia. Great treasure junks that were sometimes over 400 feet long traded with Arabia and even Africa. This beautiful model shows, perhaps in a slightly idealized form, the ships the Imperial Navy could use. If pirates dared attack a ship like this, retribution would be swift. This is a wax model of the severed head of a real Chinese pirate, which somehow ended up in London's National Maritime Museum. A gruesome example of Oriental cruelty preserved to entertain the West. In China, pirates' heads were kept in buckets and then put on public display as a warning. Losing one's head was not the only punishment inflicted on pirates. Most also lost their pigtails, which were symbols of pride.
My aim as admiral was to humiliate the pirates by making it public that they were not really men. To achieve this, we ensured that they died in so much pain that only the bravest did not cry out. I ordered that pirates should be executed slowly. First, their feet should be nailed to the deck. Then they should be beaten with 4 twisted rattans till they vomited blood. Then their bowels were cut open, and only then did they have their heads removed.
The facts suggest this deterrent didn't always work. The Ming Emperor Wu was apparently so annoyed by the continuing success of pirates in the South China Seas that he ordered better and bigger junks to be built. The emperor seemed to think that they should be fashioned after his shoe. It's a nice anecdote, but the true history of the development of the Chinese junk shows something different happened. Early junks had bamboo or rattan sails, which made them hard to maneuver. It was not till the Chinese Navy used sails made of cloth that its vessels could sail the high seas. But in the early 15th century, the Chinese lost interest in exploration because they were afraid of the expansion of Islam. In 1435, the Great Wall was extended. The Celestial Empire, which had welcomed some contact with Europe during the days of Marco Polo, now closed its doors on the outside world. The Imperial Navy was left to rot. The skills Chinese sailors had learned in voyages like those to Africa were slowly lost. On the estuaries and rivers, people lived as they had done for ages on sampans and junks. Fishing remained a traditional occupation, as Chinese poets knew.
The untamed waters persist for 1,000 years, but they tame men.
The ancient Chinese had many gods. One which sailors or junkmen worshipped was Chen Qiang Wang Ye, the river guardian king. He was actually a pirate in the 12th century. He felt so safe in his river lair that he boasted that the emperor's forces could not conquer him unless they flew from the air. In the end, it did not take such wizardries to conquer him. In defeat, the river god drowned himself in a lake. Despite this, Chinese fishermen and pirates revered him. By the mid-15th century, Chinese pirates had founded their own village on the estuary of the Pearl River.
Like many other fishermen, I turned to piracy when the fish would not bite. We would bring the goods we captured to Macau and offerings to the temple of our goddess, Ma Zhu. Then our quiet life was ruined by the Europeans.
Yet these pirates didn't travel far. And the fact that China excluded the world was to have a curious result. The Chinese Empire, which no longer had a navy of its own, needed Europeans to help suppress native pirates. The only problem was that the Chinese were not very good at knowing which Europeans were pirates and which were honest sailors. It was at Macau that the Chinese gave the Portuguese a rare opportunity. Macau was named for the sea goddess Ma Zhu, who protected both fishermen and pirates. The mandarins who controlled Canton, China's main port, ceded Macau to the Portuguese to try to stamp out piracy. Unfortunately, many of the Portuguese turned out to be privateers. They had no scruples about attacking merchant junks, as one Chinese diplomat noted in his dispatch to the imperial court.
We are inviting trouble, setting thieves to catch thieves. The Portuguese are barbarians, but they are more honorable than the British, who seem to think that it's a privilege for us to be robbed by them.
By the 17th century, the South China Seas had become a playground and a battleground for all the countries of Europe. All the Europeans who came out east were driven by dreams of the exotic, of the fabulous, and of riches. When he recorded the circumnavigation of the world by Sir Francis Drake, the English writer Richard Hakluyt wrote,
From this voyage, Drake returned with such a bounty of jewels, gold, silks, and prizes that all men of ambition in London were fired by dreams of exploration. Queen Elizabeth permitted new companies to seek routes to Muscovy, to Japan, and to China.
Thomas Cavendish, another English pirate and privateer, who had been a student at Cambridge and dreamed of imitating Sir Francis Drake, sailed to China, captured a Chinese junk, and returned from that trip in 1588 fabulously rich. The East India Company was set up in 1603, and its ships were soon regularly plundering Chinese junks. It was usually an unequal battle, because the Europeans had better guns and better ships. Piracy has always been international, a profession for all races, all colors, all creeds. And just as the European powers were invading the East threw up a pirate hero of its own, a man to rival Francis Drake and Henry Morgan. Kuo Sing Ye's father was called Gaspar Nicholas. He was an interpreter for the Dutch East India Company. He resumed his Chinese name and married a Japanese woman. In 1661, Cheng was executed. His son wanted to avenge him. Kuo Xingye managed to be both a pirate and a devout Christian. He went to the defense of Japanese Christians in Nagasaki who were being tortured and massacred by the Manchus. These are the relics of that massacre. Kuo Xingye had a clear philosophy.
I expect no mercy, but occasionally I give some to my enemies.
Kuo Xingye harried the Manchus so much that the emperor ordered the evacuation of coastal villages. In 1659, the pirate prince was defeated at the gates of Nanking on the mainland. As the city burned, the pirate fled to sea. He continued to harass Spanish and Dutch shipping in the area. The governor of the Spanish trading station at Manila responded to his demands by massacring local Chinese and burning their homes. Kuo Xingye was 39 years old when he died soon after that massacre. He was the first pirate to make a serious impact on history as Europe saw it. Kuo Xingye also founded a dynasty of pirates. One of the curious facts about piracy in the East is that it was literally a family business. Kuo Xingye bred generations of pirates. In the West, successful pirates often tried to become respectable. Woodes Rogers, for example, became governor of the Bahamas. The Chinese seem to have been rather less flexible. Once a pirate, always a pirate. By the 1760s, the water around the Pearl River had been named the Ladrones by the Portuguese, their word for thief. There were some Chinese pirates who loathed the intruders from the west. One man called Koya Akem gloried in the title of shedder and drinker of the blood of the Portugals. But others had different ideas to those of this bloodthirsty buccaneer. A Chinese pirate called Guai Panyan even recruited his crews from Portuguese sailors. In the South China Seas, over 300 years, there would be strange alliances between East and West. The British Navy, which was then beginning to explore the East, often exploded in frustration. One officer reported to the Admiralty.
The pirates pass in the most impudent manner within range of our guns. They behave with a shocking coolness and indifference.
But none of the European powers had any reason to expect that the Far East would now, around 1800, throw up a pirate queen of genius. In the history of piracy, much has been made of exceptional women pirates like Mary Read and Anne Bonny, who fought and flirted their way across the Caribbean in the 1720s. Neither of these two women was a pirate chief. Both sailed under a male captain, Jack Rackham, who was known as Calico Jack. The widow Ching was very different. She started off life as a prostitute. She then married the leader of the Red Squadron, one of the 6 fleets of pirates who formed a loose alliance. Her husband drew up a constitution for pirates.
My husband terrified men, but he did not terrify me. My husband was appointed master of the royal stables to persuade him to abandon the life of a pirate. I fear he was tempted by the position, but his associates learned of his betrayal. Later, I learned they had arranged for our cook to season his vegetables with poison. I brought together my late husband's captains and said it was vital to elect a new admiral.
The pirates now had to elect a new leader, and amazingly, given the status of women in China, they chose the widow Ching.
I divided my fleet into 6 squadrons. I gave the captains secret names, Bird and Stone, scourge of the eastern sea, wave with many fishes, scarlet scorpion. The names were poetic. My rules were not. I decided that all stolen goods must be logged. Pirates should not steal from each other. Of any stolen goods, I decreed that the pirates should own 2/10. The rest would go to the General Treasure Fund. Violation of this would be punished by death. Pirates should not abandon their post. The first offense would be punished by perforation of the ears. The second, by perforation of the heart, or death. Pirates must not mingle with captive women on deck. They must request permission from the ship's purser to use violence against any woman. Such violence will be carried out only in the hold. Violation of this will be punished by death.
At the height of her power, the widow Qing controlled a fleet of nearly 800 junks, 1,000 small boats, and hundreds of men and women. The Imperial Navy could not tolerate the pirates.
My war junk sailed against the Emperor's navy. He had turned to the Europeans for help. We would have beaten off the scum, but my men were no longer used to fighting. For so long, our flags had been enough to terrify. We had forgotten how to use our guns. I was fascinated by the old talk of the fox and the dragon. The dragon slumbers and soars. He sleeps, and in his sleep he sees. He sees the busy fox, mischievous, quick, sly, like a woman. One moonlit night, I decided. I ordered my men to row me ashore to the admiral of the Imperial fleet. I whitened my teeth. I slickened my smile, like the smile of the geishas, like the smile of the concubine I had once been. I smiled. The fox seeks the dragon's wing. The admiral accepted my surrender.
She didn't come out of it badly. The widow lived on till she was 64 years old, had a succession of young lovers, and, with the Emperor's permission, headed a confederacy of smugglers. The pirate confederacy had managed to dominate the seas around China for so long because the country was still backward in many ways. The government had few modern resources with which to fight piracy. The crunch came over opium. The mandarins of Canton confiscated opium held in British warehouses. The drug was burned, and it's an extraordinary comment on how attitudes have changed that the British government essentially went to war in order to hang on to its monopoly in handling opium. The Chinese lost. As a result of the victory, in 1842, Britain gained Hong Kong, the so-called fragrant harbor. The Times commented that the reasons for the war were understandable.
No reader of Thomas de Quincey's Confessions of an Opium Eater can be wholly content at the extent of this trade, but that does not excuse the actions of the Chinese authorities against respectable British merchants. The country must defend its trading interests.
The Opium War aroused passions both in the East and in the West. In terms of piracy, its most spectacular effect was to give two ferocious Chinese pirates the chance to establish themselves. This is the personal flag emblem of Shapeng Sai, whose name means 13th son. It is the closest to a portrait of him that we have. It was captured from him in 1849. His lieutenant, Chu Yapu, seems to have sat for a Victorian artist. This pair committed endless atrocities, which led the British to pursue them. In the 19th century, young British lieutenants were encouraged to keep logs and diaries, and many of these ambitious officers dreamed of publication. One of the most interesting was kept by Edward Cree, who was a surgeon and an artist. He drew many of the battles the Royal Navy had with pirates. Cree noted,
"We pursued the pirates on Her Majesty's ship the Fury. They returned our fire to windward, shot for shot. We were amazed by their tenacity, but determined not to let them escape. The captain was frightened that in the night they might disappear into what they called the Celestial Sea."
The Navy defeated Chuyapu's ships at Bias Bay. They went on to defeat Shapun Sai. Cree recorded that Chuyapu escaped.
"Battles have a certain beauty. I can say this with some assurance, for as a surgeon, I saw its horrors. I would fix in my mind's eye the smoke, the disposition of line, the billows, the cannonades, and recall them later in tranquility. A paradox. My captain found this strange in the midst of our pursuit of the pirates."
Chuyapu was captured and committed suicide. Shapun Sai proved more elusive. The Navy chased him 1,000 miles to the Gulf of Tonkin, one of the traditional lairs of Chinese pirates. Cree wrote of the final battle,
"The pirate tried to flee from us in a small, fast junk. I could not allow him to escape, so I bombarded him with grape shot."
But Shapun Sai was either luckier or wilier than Cree. He escaped from the Gulf of Tonkin and was pardoned by the emperor. Cree ended his own career with some distinction. One reason why piracy thrived in the China Seas was that no country really ruled the waves. Even when the Royal Navy was as strong in these seas as ever, it could not stamp out piracy, even though sometimes Europeans were victims. Hong Kong set up an anti-piracy squad, but there continued to be incidents. Tourists on cruise ships were warned that sometimes immaculately dressed Chinese couples would get on board and then take guns out to rob them at sea. In one celebrated case in 1926, the nefarious pirates were beaten off by the ship's orchestra, who switched to playing jazz. The change of tempo apparently totally confused the pirates. Sadly, no one seems to have written a pirate's rag. Usually, however, the pirates of the South China Seas, as their long history shows, were more persistent. And today, there is more pirate activity in these seas than in any other part of the world.
Stay tuned for Journeys with host Lauren Miller next here on TVO.